cults. They're creepy, captivating, and downright scary. And some have even predicted the end of the world. Ready to find out which? Up first, one of the world's most famous prophets by the name of Nostradamus, who was born on December 4th all the way back in 1503. This ominous ancestor has had many eerie predictions come true, including the Great Fire of London, the French Revolution, Buddy with the middle mustache, both world wars, and even the nuclear destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But there is another prediction made by the prophet that we are really hoping won't come true: the beginning of the end in 2024. I'm talking weather disruptions, major storms, searing heat waves, and massive earthquakes, all taking place at an unprecedented rate in a way we've just never seen. While hearing this might make you want to stock up on canned goods and survival gear, I'm really hoping he's got this one wrong. Either that, or he's actually already gotten it right. You see, the prediction was made in the 1500s, and since then, natural disasters have already greatly increased. So it's very possible Nostradamus' predictions have already come true. And all of this excess fire and brimstone he speaks of for 2024 is something we've already become adaptive to live through. Not calling that a good thing, but maybe the lesser of two evils at this point. For some, however, and more specifically the cult following of people who take the words of Nostradamus for that as gospel, these prophecies are not just a warning, but a direct message that the world is coming to an end. Next up on the list, we have Heaven's Gate. Now, if you're a Little Uzi fan, you might have heard of this one before, as the cult is heavily referenced in the artwork of his second album, Eternal Atake. The cult was founded in 1997 after a near-death experience by Marshall Applewhite and alongside former nurse Bonnie Nettles, who believed that the Earth would be wiped clean by aliens that very same year. The cult followed the idea that the sole purpose of the human body was simply to serve as a container, and that its form existed only to be abandoned upon ascension into the higher realm. The higher realm in this case being referred to as the Kingdom of Heaven, located on the Hale-Bopp comet. In order to reach this ascension, however, Applewhite's followers had to adhere to a strict set of rules, including abandoning their families and leaving behind any worldly possessions along with life as they once knew it, in exchange for a simple life dedicated to the next step on a big home in Rancho Santa Fe. Along with this, his followers were urged to follow sexual abstinence, and in a pledge of loyalty, many members voluntarily underwent the old snip snip. On the day the Hale-Bopp comet came into its closest proximity with Earth, Applewhite, along with 38 of his followers, drank a lethal mixture of phenobarbital and vodka, in the belief that it would free them from their captive human form and grant them a one-way ticket to the Comet Kingdom. Next up, we have Raelism. Not to be confused with realism, this flying saucer cult operated under the belief that human existence, along with the existence of all other living things on Earth, came to be as a direct result of genetic experimentation using the DNA of extraterrestrial life forms. The founder, Claude Vorilhon, who now goes by the name of Rael, created the organization after he was allegedly abducted by aliens and had revealed to him the many secrets of life's creation along with its purpose. Not as foreboding as the rest, as this cult does not necessarily believe the world will end, but rather that it will be taken over by our alien creators themselves in an attempt to end the world as we know it, and replace all current lifestyles with a sensual and hedonistic one that by no means follows the norms of accepted behavior within our current society. The cult, whose headquarters are located in India, boasts an impressive 85,000 members. But that's not all. The cult also claims to have successfully cloned a baby, which, with all the advances in science to date, is not necessarily unbelievable, but if it's true, impressive nonetheless. Next on the list, we have Falungong, a cult which appeared in China in the early 1990s and has actually since been outlawed by the Chinese government. The cult found its basis in the idea that one day the world would end in tragedy, and that in order to achieve fulfillment, you had to follow a strict set of guidelines that ended in the sacrifice of one's own life. Enticing people into the organization through the use of widespread superstitious fallacies and the promise of a better life for its members, the cult spared no expense or life in its quest to convince the public of its legitimacy, with going so far as to stage numerous extreme tragedies that completely violated not only Chinese law, but the Global Human Rights Act. The Falungong way also dictates that no man, woman, or child should receive scientific or medical assistance in the case of illness. And as a result, over 1,500 Falungong followers have died simply from refusing to receive medical attention. With this, alongside stage tragedies and the unaliving on both a personal and social level, who knows how many followers and innocent bystanders have fallen victim to the vicious cult to date. With the cult never specifying when the world will end, we can't help but wonder if 2024 will be the year. The Falungong organization was officially deemed illegal on July 22nd of 1999, and all practices were therefore banned in accordance with Chinese law. The next one goes to a registered enemy of public safety, a cult which in recent years has garnered notoriety due to a documentary released in 2023 which tracks the horrors and the ins and outs of this messed up minefield of coercion and corruption. The Aum Shinrikyo cult, referred to simply as Aum, which translates to Supreme Truth, was founded by Shoko Ashara in Japan. The cult, which heavily relied on scare tactics and manipulation, was goal-driven, the goal being that the leader, Shoko, would successfully take over the island of Japan and would later move on to conquering the world as a whole. The false prophet predicted that Armageddon would occur in the year 1997 and humanity would end, except for the elite few who joined and were worthy of acceptance into the Aum cult. In 1995, leading up to the falsely foreshadowed end of the world, Ashara was convicted of masterminding a sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway that resulted in the injury of 5,500 people and the tragic loss of 13 more. Ashara was sentenced to death for his crimes and is currently awaiting execution. While a large number of the cult's members are currently serving life behind bars, the organization is still considered a threat and has therefore earned its place on a very specific global watch list. The movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God is next on the list. That's a mouthful. They referred to themselves as a fringe sect of Catholicism, but their sinister practices widely separate them from any of their self-claimed sectional counterparts. The cult was formed in the late 1980s by a Ugandan politician by the name of Joseph Kibwetere, after a former SEX worker had come to him claiming to have been seeing visions of the Virgin Mary. When Kibwetere brought these claims to the Vatican, he was dismissed, and so the movement was born. The so-called faith believed that the visions of Mary had been a warning of Armageddon, and claimed that the only hope for salvation was strictly following the 10 Commandments. At its peak, the organization was comprised of 4,000 members, but when the original Doomsday date came and went, that number dwindled significantly. In a panic, Kibwetere quickly amended his original claim of January 1st, 2000 for the world's last day to March 17th of the same year. When March 17th rolled around, 530 members of the church gathered to rejoice in prayer at the chapel, but were met with something entirely different when an explosion went off in the village, engulfing the church in massive flames, and it was only then the patrons realized that all of the windows and doors had been boarded shut. Many mass graves were later uncovered within the village, containing hundreds more people who had once resided in the area. While some believe Kibwetere to have perished in the fire, reports of sighting after the fact beg the question of whether or not he is still going around prepping for the true end of days. Up next is James Weasley Rawles and the Survivalists, an individualized cult movement that preaches preparation and warns of the inevitable coming of the end. Rawles, the American author, former Army intelligence officer, and survival retreat consultant, has garnered himself quite the cult following after the release of his novel How to Survive the End of the World as We Know It in 2022. Rawles has since released 8 additional novels following along the survivalist subject line. The self-declared prepper believes the world will come to an end due to power grid failure, which honestly is a really scary take. No aliens, no cataclysmic weather events, simply just the removal of access to power, being enough to topple societies, countries, and continents as a whole within days, months, and years, coming to the inevitable dismantlement of human rule. Let's face it, how many of us could realistically survive without technology for more than a few days, let alone months? I'm talking about heat, running water, refrigeration, GPS, so much more than just communication and entertainment. The economy would fall and chaos would ensue. Rawles, who is believed to reside in a secret bunker located somewhere in San Jose, California, says that any prepper worth his salt is already set up with self-sufficient, off-the-grid accommodations including firewood or coal, years worth of food stores, guarded gardens, livestock, and weaponry, and if they're smart, an advanced medical training certificate too. Next up, we have a religion-based doomsday cult making international headlines. This comes after leader Paul Mackenzie and 30 of his followers were brought to court in the coastal town of Malindi in Kenya on charges of being directly responsible for the deaths of 429 members of their church. Good News International Church. Out of the 429, an estimated 200 were some of the most vulnerable members of society, if you can infer what I mean by that. The bodies were found in dozens of shallow graves across 800 acres of ranch belonging to the church located along the coast. The graves were found after 15 rescued and former members of the church alerted authorities on what exactly had been going on. 4 of the 15 later died in hospital due to malnutrition and starvation. Autopsies done on the mass graves show that many of the deaths had been due to starvation, forced restriction of the airways, and suffocation. Mackenzie had garnered his following by convincing religious members of his sham establishment that the world was coming to an end, and in order to achieve salvation, they must confine themselves to the parameters of his village, cease interactions with others, including other members of the church, and destroy any vital documents, including any identification, certificates of titles to property, certificates of academics, or marriage. Recent reports have stated that the charges placed against Mackenzie recognize his actions as those of unforgivable terror. Up next, we have the Order of the Solar Temple, founded in Geneva in 1984. This religious cult was created as a revival for the Knights Templar, a religious military order founded in the 12th century and later dismantled in 1312. In 1985, Bernard Raymond Faber Palaprat, claiming to be the former head of the Knights of Templar, attempted to recreate the organization but was unsuccessful, as his group split into so many separate fractions following separate belief systems. Luc Joret, a proud member of one of the fractions, later went on to develop his very own religious organization by the name of the Order of the Solar Temple, with a belief system strongly rooted in the idea of the world's imminent destruction. More specifically, Joret believed a worldwide catastrophe would take place in the mid-1990s. In preparation for the event, members were invited to participate in a ceremony deemed necessary for ascension to a higher spiritual plane. The ceremony, which consisted of the voluntary and involuntary deaths of 53 members of the Solar Temple across Canada and Switzerland, ended in flames as the buildings in which the ceremonies took place in were set on fire upon completion of the ritual by members who remained in the building after the fires were started. A year later, 16 more followers met the same fate, along with 5 more 2 years after that. Dark stuff. And finally, we have yet another space cult existing under the guise of religious extraterrestrial worship. UFO religion, as it's often been referred to, originated in Taiwan in 1993 after being founded by Chen Hongmin, a former professor of sociology at the Kenyan College of Pharmacology and Science. The religion, which has been described as an offbeat mix of Buddhism, Christianity, New Age religion, and select Western cult believes in extraterrestrial input with regards to human affairs, bases itself in spiritual energy and the recognition of evil. Founder Hong Min was convinced that the end of days would come in March of 1998 and moved his many followers across the world to Garland, Texas. Why? Well, he thought Garland sounded like God's land. He then prophesied that God would appear to his disciples in the form of Hong Min on TV, specifically Channel 18, to formally announce his second coming. And when that day came, followers would be granted access to the spaceships in the sky that had lingered just above them for years, disguised as clouds. However, when the day came, nothing happened, and so Hong Min revised his prophecy, claiming that he had simply gotten the date wrong. He relocated his cult to New York. However, many of his disciples, disenchanted, opted to return home to Taiwan or apply for legal immigrant status in the United States and start new lives. If he did get the date wrong, though, who's to say that a peer review of his calculations wouldn't schedule the end of days for 2024? That's our video for the day. I'm your host, Hannah Thompson. Thanks so much for watching.